History has no memory. It's people who carry stories forward. Some are true. Some were true once. Some just need to be told. In tonight's episode, you decide, is this based on truth, or is it all a lie? Before we descend, take a moment to subscribe. And in the comments, tell us where you're listening from. Maybe you're huddled under polar bear blankets in the dead of the Arctic winter. Maybe you're swinging in a jungle hammock, all wrapped up like a snack. Or maybe you're alone in a quiet room. Or so you think. The Atlas leads us into forgotten towns. Strange ruins, lost souls, and impossible legends. Places that slip between memory and shadow. Now, dim the lights. Let the world grow quiet. And step with me into tonight's story. The girl born without bones. True or false? You decide. Part 1. The Island. She was born on a small island in the Seychelles in the 1820s, on an unnamed sand key within sight of Mahé. Most people lived on Mahé then. Pralan and La Digue held smaller settlements. The entire colony numbered only a few thousand souls, 6,000 to 7,000 by the middle of that decade, small enough that everyone knew the sound of everyone else's cough. The girl did not push into the world. She spilled, limp as seaweed, eyes already open. Her arms bent too far, her legs curled like wet rope. The midwife touched her chest and whispered that the bones were there, but soft, not done, like dough that needed more time in the oven. Her father saw her once. He stood in the doorway, silent, then walked down the beach. By nightfall, his canoe was gone. He was never seen again. At first, she lay in a wooden basin lined with cloth. However, wood swells and splinters. Months later, a trader's launch offloaded a tinned copper washtub, long and smooth. Her mother bought it. That bowl became the girl's bed, her bath, her sea. Although she was a normal-sized baby, she preferred to be folded, knees drawn up, arms tucked in. Her head and chest looked ordinary. Her pelvis was narrow. Her arms and legs were floppy and bendy, as if the rules that stiffen a limb had been forgotten. Freckles spotted her nose like rust on tin. Her eyes were pale sea blue and drank light. People who saw her remembered those eyes long after they forgot everything else. Part 2. Names and Daily Life. On the island she was given names. Tifi Sanzo, the little girl without bones. Zanfandello, the child of the water. Sometimes only the girl. Her mother was careful with her. Children still dared each other to touch the water in the bowl. They poked a forearm or a shin and jumped when the girl hissed faintly through her teeth. Not a threat. Proof of life. Each morning her mother scrubbed the single white cloth in seawater and ash and dried it stiff on a line. No buttons, no ties. She dressed her as you'd dress an altar. Plain, clean, renewed. Meals were soft things for a soft girl. Mashed yam and plantain. Fish broth strained twice through linen so no needle bones could catch. She loved yam with salt. She hated papaya. Papaya, to her, tasted like spoiled breath. It lingered, too ripe and too sweet, like something overripe hiding rot. On feast days she was given tamarind syrup on a finger. She closed her eyes when she tasted it, as if she were memorizing sweetness so it wouldn't escape. Bathing became ritual. The copper bowl was lowered into a larger wooden bath. The water warmed with stones from a cook fire. As the bath rose, her body floated up and out of the bowl, head supported in her mother's palm. Water poured slowly over chest and ribs and hips. Her floppy rubber limbs drifted in slow arcs, fragile as eelgrass. She looked most at peace then, freckles bright as stars, pale eyes half closed. Part 3. Watching. As she grew, she couldn't play, so she watched. She tracked ants carrying sand beneath the floorboards. She counted the breadth of the lagoon by wave and drawdown. She stared at the shadow mesh of nets drying in sun and how the pattern slid over the hut wall as the day turned. Her eyes became her hands. A glance meant wait. A longer glance meant again. A narrowing meant enough. At first, the other children mocked her. Later, they obeyed. They sat in a ring around the bowl and let her direct their games with nothing but looks and tiny sounds. When she finally allowed laughter, it came all at once, bright as birds shaken from a tree. Her voice was small and pressed through teeth. Wait. Again. Enough. When she spoke, people stopped without knowing why. Even the goats stilled for a heartbeat. She renamed the hours of the day. Before dawn was blue quiet. Noon was hum time. Evening was smoke hour. The family repeated her words until they forgot whose words they were. Part 4. Family. She had 2 normal sisters. They primped and changed into borrowed dresses to parade the lane at dusk. Later, when sailors and clerks were posted to Victoria, they powdered their throats and tucked flowers behind ears before small dances. The girl watched every comb stroke and ribbon knot like it was a lesson in architecture. Her sisters carried her in a sling woven soft and broad, 2 hands to her head, 2 to her hips. Never the arms, never the legs. Count aloud before each lift. They brought her close to hibiscus. She preferred the yellow. Red made her sneeze. They carried her to the reef at low tide, shading her skull with a palm leaf while she counted waves. They carried her to the goat pen, where she smiled faintly at the clatter of hooves on stone. She admired the height of people. When a tall fisherman ducked the lintel, her eyes followed him up and up as if he were a mast. Mostly she was quiet. But when a cousin grew tall one rainy season, the girl said, with a hint of pride, "Skylong." They learned her weight and her ways. They learned how a careless wrist could fold a bendy elbow the wrong direction. They learned patience by carrying her. But once they failed. Part 5. The accident. She was 11 when it happened. Both sisters lifted the sling. A heel slipped on damp clay. The sling pivoted, the copper rim canted. She spilled out. The sound was small, a shell striking another shell, making the ocean inside go quiet. She went still. Her mother bent close, desperate to find breath. There it was at last. Thin, stubborn. The midwife arrived swift from the next yard, hands smelling of ash and bark. She cupped the thin skull with both palms and whispered into the soft spot as if a message could be pushed back inside. For 3 days the family kept vigil, dampening cloths, reading, waiting. The girl lay in the blue quiet and did not move. On the 3rd day she opened her eyes and spoke one word through her teeth. Here. The midwife called it a coma without the word. After that, rules hardened. No half counts, no wet ground, no lifts when wind shoved at the walls. She was carried as if time itself could be dropped. Part 6. Bread and books. The mother baked bread for a living. Loaves gone by morning to men who rode and clerks who tallied. The hut smelled of yeast and smoke from first light. The girl loved that smell. She could not bite bread unless it was laid in water to soften. Her sisters would break a heel into a tin cup, pour warm water, and feed her the sodden heart with a shell spoon. On days when flour was low, her mother would wet the crust and let her breathe the steam. "Taste with your nose," she'd say, and the girl did. Books found her the way rain finds cracks. A clerk's wife lent a small French reader. A catechist brought a torn pamphlet. Sailors left almanacs with tide tables and thumbnail maps. She liked the parts about people moving, their energy, their battles, the way they built things that defied wind. Her favourite picture was a harbour stacked with masts like a forest, every line a height she could count. Her older sister read each night by lamp smoke. The girl held the tide tables and followed the rows of numbers with her eyes. Eel, vent, os, island, wind, bone. She repeated them until they smoothed into breath. The almanac maps showed reefs as dots and skulls and thin bars for prevailing wind. She said the wind lines looked like a person breathing. In, out, sleep, wake. She asked that a map page be tucked under her cloth when she slept. It warmed to her body and softened at the folds. Part 7. The Doctor. A French doctor came ashore in 1838 on a trading cutter that took soundings along the coast. White hat, leather case, salt in the seams of his boots. He expected fever, rickets, scurvy. Instead, he found a child who lived in a shining bowl. He examined her ribs, slight, but doing their one job. He pressed the chest and felt the lift under his palm. He traced the skull with 2 fingers and watched the skin thrum with pulse. He lifted an arm that folded like wet rope and set it down carefully, as if the limb might choose a different shape if he wasn't watching. Journal of Dr. Etienne Marot, 1838. The subject is female, approximately 11 years. Head and thorax of ordinary dimensions. Pelvis narrow. Limbs markedly hypertonic. Joints lax in all directions, giving an impression of bonelessness, though bone is present. Skull thinned. Pulsation visible. Ribs slight but functional, sufficient for respiration and cardiac protection. Vertebral column incapable of supporting the trunk. Speech is faint and dental, forced through clenched teeth, eyes lucid, affect calm. He listed his guesses: hyperphosphatasia, failure of mineralization, bones soft as wax, osteogenesis imperfecta, fractures in utero with distorted healing, congenital muscular hypertonia, muscle laxity that makes a body seem boneless, sea goat syndrome, local term for infants born during high tide with limbs that flex in reverse, Latinier baby, named for the wind-warped palms, a child whose spine bends like fronds in storm, jellybone feeblement, a planter's superstition, believed caused by twin curses, envy and salt. St. Elmo's pelvis, a sailor's diagnosis for unwalkable girls who spark strange dreams in men. The droop, not an ailment, merely a shrug passed down through generations of women too tired to fight the air. None fit entirely, he wrote, and underlined it twice. He tried splints of willow bound in leather, her bendy legs wrapped around them like vines. He tried a stiff collar for the neck. She gagged until her eyes watered. He took it off and apologized in a voice no one needed translated. He wrote again. The body refuses artifice. Spine offers no promise. Ribs are a miracle of just enough. Lungs persist, heart continues. A life maintained on the edge of insufficiency. Before he left, he said she would not see adulthood. He said her ribs were just enough. He said she would never bear a child. The mother nodded once and lifted the palm leaf higher over her daughter's head to keep off the sun. Part 8. Villagers. At first, people kept distance. Some made the sign against the evil eye. Some whispered that the father had walked into the sea for a reason. But the mother sold bread and didn't flinch. She scrubbed the step with brine. She smiled with flour on her forearms. She tilted the bowls so a neighbour could see the pale blue eyes looking back. Fear softened. Fishermen left a shell or a twist of rope near the door because it felt right. Women brought a square of muslin or a bit of ribbon with a pin in it. Small things that proved a person could be cherished for their own sake. A widower began to stop and recite the day's sky to her. High clouds, low clouds, a bruise of weather to the south. She learned to love storms through his mouth. There were nights she begged for lightning. She loved the flash and the god drum of thunder and the way rain galloped over the roof. When a squall strobed the lagoon, she breathed like a runner at the edge of starting. But fear came later, after a bolt struck a palm so close the hut shook and dead fronds fell like spears. After that she counted the time between flash and crack with tight thin breaths, and said enough when it grew too small. Part 9. The fading years. By 15, the pulse in her skull beat plainly beneath the skin. Strangers recoiled. The family learned to read it the way a sailor reads a weather glass. High when she was content. Frantic when the room grew hot. Shallow when sleep thinned. Her breath stayed small but faithful. Her head and chest still looked ordinary. Her pelvis stayed narrow. Her limbs remained floppy and bendy. A child's rope work that never hardened. She spoke less, but her words sharpened. Storms were drums. Thin days were bone light. Crowded huts were too much. She made a word for the quiet after rain that smelled of leaf and ash. She made a word for the blink before sleep. Her sisters used those words at market without noticing. The mother sometimes felt shame when people stared. How small the girl's world was. How public the bowl had made it. She felt pride when the girl's eyes pinned a person to the spot and made them gentle. The feelings met somewhere inside her and agreed to carry on. Part 10. The end. At 16, her breath rattled like tide in a cave. She opened her eyes only for moments. Her mother lowered the copper bowl into the wooden bath and lifted her as the water lifted her, the way she had since the beginning. Stones clinked against wood as cooling water was replaced with warm. Her sisters moved quietly. Bread rose under a damp cloth on the table as if the hut were breathing with her. Her last meal was yam with salt. The sisters softened a corner of bread in warm water and gave her the heart. She bit the spoon softly and left a faint crescent in the wood. Someone kept it. It still lies in a drawer that smells of rope and anise. The doctor had written years earlier, prognosis, unlikely beyond adolescence, end expected without struggle when ribs no longer suffice for the work of breath. It was exactly so. Her last breath sounded like a wave slipping between larger ones, the kind you only hear if you're listening for it. Some say she was buried in coral sand under a breadfruit. Some say the tide rose that night and carried the copper bowl through the door and into the lagoon, where it drifted past the reef and turned until it found the line of wind. Sailors, who love a better story more than a true one, later claimed a showman kept her in a jellyfish tank. On the island, they say she never left. Part 11. Footnote. Old people still whisper her names. Tifi Sanzo, Zanfan Dello. They say her freckles look like sand flung from a wet hand. They say her eyes made you quiet. No one quotes the doctor now. They remember the hat, perhaps, the leather case, the way he stared too long. But his notes turned to ash. What stayed was the way the mother's hands moved under the head, the way the sisters counted, the way neighbours slowed their steps at the door. The lesson of her life remains. How to carry what cannot be dropped. How to move slowly enough that even the wind does no harm. How to make a world out of watching. This is not a grand story. It is a girl in a copper bowl, a mother's bread, two careful sisters, a strip of sand off Mahé, and the sea breathing always near. Was it true? Or just a well-told lie? Tell us what you believe in the comments, and why. We know many of you listen late at night, sometimes while trying to fall asleep. Let us know where you're listening from, and whether this story kept you awake or gave you good dreams. And one more thing, if you know a rare or hidden place, a ruin, an old legend or a forgotten town you'd like us to cover, share it in the comments. Your suggestion might become part of the Atlas. If you enjoyed wandering these forgotten corners, subscribe and join us again next time for another journey into the unknown.